Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Hot Topics and Commodities and our focus on sunflowers. This session is presented by Grainews. I'm Carrie Belanger, the editor of Grainews, and I'll be your host and moderator for today's session. We have two excellent guest speakers for you today. First, we'll hear from Morgan Cott, who is an agronomy extension specialist with Manitoba Crop Alliance, and we will be discussing sunflower production. Then we'll hear from Market Farms' Bruce Burnett, who will provide us with a national weather update. Following Morgan's presentation, we'll have a live Q&A. Please type any questions you have for Morgan in the chat box to the right of your screen at any time. There will also be special offers popping up for you to claim during the webinar, so please keep an eye out for those in the chat box on your screen. Additionally, you will receive an email tomorrow with a link to the session recording if you need to refer to specific content or have to hop off for a few minutes today. For the best user experience, if possible, use Google Chrome as your web browser during this session. If you happen to lose connection during the session, please press the reconnect button at the top of the screen. Our first speaker is Morgan Cott, a special crops agronomy extension specialist with Manitoba Crop Alliance. Morgan will provide us with sunflower production tips for high quality grain and yields for farmers to set themselves up for success with the crop. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Morgan Cott. I'm with the Manitoba Crop Alliance. I'm the agronomy extension specialist for special crops in Manitoba. So a little bit of background. I began working here as a field agronomist for the Manitoba Corn Growers Association, working with corn for about 6 years. And then in 2018, the National Sunflower Association of Canada had a little shift with their employees, and I started doing their agronomy work. And Daryl started doing some of our trial work. So we already were amalgamating a little bit with services. So that's when I started working with sunflowers again. And then in August of 2020, just last year, our two commodity groups amalgamated with 3 other commodity groups to form the Manitoba Crop Alliance. So my job hasn't really changed with that. The biggest thing would be the addition of flax. So special crops for us is corn, sunflower, and flax. We also have an agronomy extension specialist for cereal crops. But generally, that's how things are looking over here right now. So today I'm presenting on sunflowers, obviously, making the grade with sunflowers. A quick overview of what we'll be looking at and discussing today. I won't go into it because you'll have a whole 40 or so minutes to deal with this with me. Okay, so to jump in, I always like to do this little intro. Sunflowers are pretty interesting and have a good history. The wild sunflower is native to North America, and is said to have been cultivated by American Indians in Arizona and New Mexico area around 3000 BC. It was possibly even thought to be domesticated before corn was in the US. So there were various sunflower seed colors like black, white, red, and black and white striped. And then the commercialization of sunflower occurred in Russia. And only in around the 1880s did sunflower return to North America to become a cultivated crop. Now, this table has changed a little over the years, but Ukraine remains in the same position it did 5 years ago as top sunflower producer in the world. Canada doesn't really hold a position anywhere near these rankings. We have very few acres, but it gives us a good idea of where most of the sunflowers are grown here. What is important to us is the local data and how acres are trending by sunflower type and total acreage. Sunflower acres have seen a surge in the past 2 years again, which reflects great yields the years prior and also good pricing that we've been fortunate enough to have. So you see from 2018, our acres were quite low. And then in 2019, we increased acres by 31%. And 2020, we increased again by 33%. So 85,000 is it's a good number for us in Manitoba. And hopefully that trend continues because we're still lower than what we used to be several years ago. I also noted below the acreage in the Dakotas from 2019. Between the two states, they grow about 75% of total US acres. South Dakota, a little bit more, but about 500,000 acres in 2019 each. So total acres in US being almost 1.4 acres, they have a good majority. So you have an idea of where sunflowers are grown in North America, right in our sort of 3 districts. Next up, I'm going to discuss the importance of making a grade with sunflowers. Of course, with any commodity, if you can raise a premium product, you make it more marketable and improve sellability. With sunflower, you also improve the number of different markets that you'll be able to sell to. In agriculture, we don't have control of everything, namely environment, which means weather and pests, but we do have control of our crop management. Sunflowers are particularly sensitive to rotation, plant population, planting dates, row spacing, and plant spacing. You can also manage sunflower harvest in a specific way that doesn't necessarily ensure grain, but improves the likelihood of the best grade possible. Now, sizing plays a major role in sunflower grading. Confection sunflower means in shell, and farmers should be selecting hybrids based on the percentage of large seed they will produce. Seed size and percentage nut meat are 2 key variables to keep in mind when selecting confection hybrids. Now, seed sizing is generally evaluated as a percentage over a blank 64th, which is around whole screen size. We're comparing 16, 18, 20, and 22 usually, the 4 most common sizes. Typically, the larger the percentage of seed over a 20/64th round whole screen, the better. The bigger, the better. Seed under 16/64 is generally too small and may be hulled or used as bird seed. The 16 through 18/64 seed size is primarily used for hulling to produce kernel. The 20/64 size is commonly used in domestic in-shell markets, so that would stay in Manitoba and be sold as sunflower seeds. And while seed that is 22/64 or over is primarily used for export in-shell markets. Test weight, confection sunflowers are generally larger and longer than oil sunflowers, but have a lower test weight. I just noted here that the test weight with greater than 23 pounds a bushel is good, but a producer would prefer to see at least 25 pounds a bushel in their confects. Oil seeds are a bit more broad, looking for a goal of 28 to 32 pounds a bushel. Oil seeds are heavier because of their dense oil content. So they're smaller, but they're heavier. Dockage in sunflowers is usually a result of these 3 points that we've listed here. Sclerotinia infections can produce dark roast kernels, which we don't want. Seed color can be altered by scuffing or head rot, and insect damage by banded sunflower moth or lygus bugs can all cause dockage, and I'll discuss that shortly. Now remember, sunflowers are a special crop. We need to treat them this way, and we like to say, if you take care of the crop, have patience and manage it well, you will be rewarded. And we're going to talk now about the agronomics and all the factors that determine sunflower quality and grading. We'll go through the list here. First and foremost, we have variety selection. As with every crop, you need to select your variety of sunflowers early on. The first decision being what end product or contract you're aiming for. Next, take a look at variety performance data, like we have in the Seed Manitoba Guide or whatever your local guide may be. This information can be found for Manitoba on the MCA website that I've listed here. The following traits are some really important ones to consider in order to achieve good quality grain at harvest. Choosing maturity or dry down inaccurately for your field can make a major impact on harvest timing and environment at that stage as well. We're dealing with a long season crop here, so we want to get that number right. Genetic traits that are geared towards pest-like diseases are going to be very important. based on your rotation. If you're growing oil seeds, you need to consider oil content stats on each variety before choosing. And finally, what a typical test weight is will impact your variety choice. Sunflowers are suited to many different soil types, but your best results are generally going to come from your well-drained soils with high water holding capacity and neutral or near neutral soil pHs. Fertility is important for quality because you want to be generous enough that plants have enough groceries to carry it through to grain fill and beyond, promoting large seed size, a healthy plant to be transporting nutrients to the water and water to the grain. Sunflowers are very deep rooted, so sampling to a depth of 24 inches is a must. Do not just choose 0 to 6 inches or 0 to 12. 24 inches is absolutely necessary for sunflowers and deep rooted crops like them. You're not limited with fertilizer application methods, and any of these here will work well for sunflowers. However, don't ever put fertilizer down with a seed in furrow, as sunflowers are far too sensitive to tolerate fertilizer burn. And generally, I don't like to say this too much to guys, but if you're going in blind and say you just bought a piece of land or are renting it, or you have no data from last year, they say a 2,000 pound yielding sunflower crop can be fertilized equivalent to a 40 bushel acre wheat crop with regards to NP and K. So if you're doing the rough math, for every 100 pounds of yield that you want to achieve, you'll need 0.05 pounds of nitrogen. So here the example is if you want to achieve 2,000 pounds times 0.05 pounds of nitrogen, you'll need 100 pounds of total nitrogen. Planting accuracy has a bigger impact on actual yield than anything else, but it's extremely important. In Manitoba, we plant sunflowers in mid-May, no later than June 1st, hopefully, and just to make sure we reach physiological maturity before a killing fall frost. Planting to a depth of, I don't really like 1 1/4, I prefer 1.5 to 2 inches into 10 degrees Celsius soils at a depth of 2 inches. Meaning 2-inch depth soil is 10 degrees Celsius. This enables seed to germinate quickly, and as long as there is soil moisture, of course, and no pests get to it first. We need to avoid skips and doubles because that will affect head size and seed size come fall. And as always, slow down when planting to ensure accuracy. So when planting confections, remember that decreasing plant populations will increase test weight. Generally, we target from 14,000 plants per acre up to 16,000 plants per acre final populations. So if you or your producer find populations to be greater than 16,000 ppA, you'll just notice a decrease in seed size and therefore a decrease in test weights. And at 90 to 95% survival, to achieve those numbers, you want to plant about 17,500 plants per acre. Just talk to your supplier, though, on specific percent seed germination for the lot number that they've given you, just to give you more accurate planting rates to reach that final population. And then also very important in Manitoba is to be applying a cutworm insecticide with your pre-emergence herbicide. I do find that producers have great success controlling cutworm populations in the long run. And since we plant at such low populations, you absolutely need to protect every single seed that goes in the ground. Now, oil seeds are a bit more flexible with planting rates, and you can see here that you do increase populations for different markets being targeted. Final populations when targeting bird food may be as high as 24,000 plants per acre. For the oil market, final populations of between 22 and 23,000 are desired, and crops destined for the dehull market, bakeries, and food processors should be 20,000 ppA because you want bigger seeds for those. The preferred equipment for placement of sunflower seed in the field will depend on the type of sunflower. For precise depth control, a row crop planter is preferred over an air seeder, and to ensure accurate seed placement for confection sunflowers. Now, an air seeder or drill will work for oilseed type sunflowers that are typically solid seeded, but it's far, far less precise, and I personally would never recommend it for a crop that I know works best as a row crop. Singulation is extremely important with sunflowers, and having multiple seeds in one location will create competition between plants, just resulting in smaller seed at harvest. So I recommend using a labeled pre-plant incorporated herbicide for early season weed control. You can also use a combination of these following. You use a pre-plant or pre-emergent herbicide application, inter-row cultivation, don't roll your eyes, it's making a huge comeback, and is really effective, especially as we see that we're starting to lose some of our herbicide or in-crop herbicide options. And also planting herbicide tolerant varieties that we do have available to us nowadays. Now, of course, none of these options will be 100% effective, but a combination of any of them will definitely improve control during the critical weed-free period. As I said earlier, an insect applied in a tank mix with your in-crop herbicide is a great option to reduce insect pressure, namely cutworm pressure early on. I do need to double check, but I believe we do have an in-furrow pesticide labeled that can also control chewing insects. So learn how to scout for cutworms and scout often. It's best to be scouting first thing in the morning and also at dawn or later because that's when they're most active, being outside the heat of the day hours. Cutworms may begin feeding before emergence, which is very hard to scout for, but as soon as the crop has emerged, don't delay scouting any longer and continue probably at least till before. But you'll notice if pressure is still bad, you'll continue to scout. So the images that I've given here, this one on the right is a cutworm a sunflower plant that's been chewed by a cutworm of some kind. It looks like it may have gotten the growing point here, but who knows? I doubt that this plant would come back. In Manitoba, we generally find red-backed cutworms in the bottom left picture, but more commonly I find dingy cutworms, which is the picture beside it. That's probably 90% of the cutworms that I usually find in the field, but it depends on the year and how much success they've had overwintering or blowing in. Malagus bugs are another major insect of concern with sunflowers because they do affect seed quality. They feed on developing seed and can cause kernel brown spot, seen in the image on the left here. These are small brown to black spots on the blunt or distal end of sunflower seeds. This is obviously a main concern in confects as they are sold for direct consumption and quality is obviously affected. So processors will discount affected seed with only 0.5% damage in the finished product, which is an extremely intolerant number. Malagus bug feeding can also result in a bitter taste to the seeds. Insecticide application is most beneficial when applied during early flower at the R5.1 stage. Second applications may be necessary if Malagus bugs are high in neighboring fields or conditions are just perfect. So Malagus bugs are easily identified by the white triangle behind their head. You also have 2 white dots on their back and 2 more white spots on the wingtips. When they're first stage nymphs, they are green, but they also have that triangle marking behind their head, which is really their distinguishing trait. Now I've included an image below right here of a minute pirate bug because the two I find can be confused since they both have triangular markings. There's minute pirate bugs are black and they have a white triangle on the base of the tips of their leaves, I guess. But minute pirate bugs are beneficial insects though, so we want to preserve them in the field. The banded sunflower moth is next. So the adult moth is small, straw-colored moth, about a quarter or a half-inch long, with that characteristic brown triangle area in the middle portion of the front wings. Adult moths emerge from the soil in mid-July, so we start scouting for them before the larvae emerge and are the real pests to the sunflower. It's best to know when the moths are here because you know the eggs are coming. The adults lay eggs on the bracts of the sunflower head, and the eggs hatch within 5 to 8 days. So larvae are an interesting thing. Newly hatched larvae are off-white with a dark brown head, and as they grow, they gradually change from light pink or yellowish, then to reddish or purplish, and finally green at maturity. So they're should be easily identified. The larvae can be quite destructive, though. I've shown this image on the left where they've entered several seeds and presumably eaten the nut meat inside, either leaving partial seed kernels or none at all. The seed will normally just pass through the combine since it dries to a small size. Insecticides can also be applied for banded sunflower larvae and also at the R5.1 stage. Banded sunflower also have predators, including the minute pirate bug that I just mentioned. I've included a few more pests of the sunflower on this page. First, on the top left are thistle caterpillars. They're found in about mid-July to mid-June to early July, and will skeletonize the plant. So there's little green tissue left. They're not usually economical, but in the past few years, I've been noticing them pretty readily, though I haven't recommended anybody spray for them yet, but they are alarming when you see them. Sunflower beetles, top right here, they look almost identical to Colorado potato bugs and are also defoliators. Stem weevils are also a pest of sunflowers. They occur in June through August and are rarely an economical concern in Manitoba. And finally on this page, the concern with stem weevils is that they are suspected in vectoring Phoma blackstem in sunflowers. And then sunflower maggots. We have 3 different types of sunflower maggots. One is called the sunflower maggot, then sunflower receptacle maggot, and sunflower seed maggot. And they all do negligible damage, but can be alarming when you see the affected heads. More insects. The top left here, sunflower bud moth looks similar to banded sunflower moth, but has 2 distinct markings on its wings. They are not economically significant, but you can sometimes find damage via malformations on sunflower heads and stalks. So that is the alarming part of their damage, but it shouldn't be economical. Head clipping weevils. Obviously, the damage is pretty obvious. They clip heads. It's most often not economical and usually occurs on field margins. No other insects that I know of do the same thing. So if you do see head clipping, that's most likely what it is, unless it's some other environmental concern. Seed weevils, they can be gray or reddish color. Seeds infested by the larvae enlarge and protrude above the surrounding seeds. So you'll notice that they stick out a little bit on the head. And finally, larval sunflower midge feeding causes brown necrotic spots at the base of the bracts and overgrowth of the sunflower head. Sunflower midge usually is not economical as well. So just things to watch out for. These insects will impact quality, but they won't make a huge economical impact. The most effective strategy against disease control is crop rotation and avoiding planting a sunflower crop within 4 years of another crop that hosts similar diseases of concern for the area or climate. Downy mildew is seen here on the left. Typical systemic systems in seedlings include dwarfing, like you can see in this bigger picture here. This middle plant is much smaller than its neighboring plant. It also has yellowing of the leaves, and the appearance of white cottony masses on the lower and sometimes upper leaf surface during periods of high humidity. So if you see the yellowing leaf and you look on the underside, it will be matched with that white cottony look on the underside of the leaves. The heads of the few plants that do reach maturity face straight upwards and rarely produce viable seed. Now, rust of sunflowers is not unlike other rusts, though it can be highly economical in humid conditions. When rust is found in a sunflower crop, it's recommended to scout often for movement up the plant and increases in the leaf area infected. There are many resources that are available for identifying rust and identifying what the leaf area coverage is. So I always recommend having that handy when in a sunflower crop, really anytime past mid-July or so. Just keep it with you so that you can refer to the chart, whether the infected area is 1% or 5%. You want to be keeping a tab on that because it can increase quite quickly if we do get rain. The sclerotinia is another very important disease of sunflowers. Sclerotinia wilt is this picture here with the sunflower stalks and the arrows pointing to it. You can't really tell what's going on, but it causes premature wilting and death of the plant. So the leaves in this image are just wilted and the top leaves are very green and healthy. Basal rot is this middle bottom picture, identified as a brown canker at the base of the stem that extends above the soil line with a white moldy growth on the canker surface. And this picture on the right for sclerotinia is mid-stalk rot. It begins with an infection of the leaf, and the fungus progresses internally through the petiole until it reaches the stem. Cultural practices to avoid high plant densities by reducing populations and high nitrogen fertilization help lower the incidence of infection. But resistance genes prove to be the most effective approach to avoid sclerotinia infections. The top right here is Phomopsis stem canker. It causes extensive pith degradation, and the stalk can be crushed easily under moderate pressure, like between your thumb and forefinger. And infected plants are going to be prone to lodging. Then Phoma below, it looks similar but has smaller and jet black lesions, which are the identifying trait for that. Stem lesions don't result in pith damage or lodging and are generally superficial. Now, sclerotinia is easily the most important disease affecting sunflowers, and it often results in yield and quality losses. The first symptoms of head rots are usually the appearance of water-soaked spots or bleached areas on the fleshy back of the head. The fungus can decay, and it'll decay the entire head with the leaf layer falling away completely from the base of the head, leaving only a bleached, shredded vascular system interspersed with large sclerotia. So they say that the skeletonized heads resemble straw brooms, and they're very obvious in the field, even from a distance. So if you're driving by, you'll definitely notice the white color in the plants compared to plants that still have their heads attached. Yield loss from head rot on an individual plant can range from minimal loss to total loss because the head can disintegrate and drop to the ground prior to harvest. Intact but diseased heads will have lighter and fewer seeds with lower oil content and will shatter during harvest. Crop rotation is the simplest and most cost-effective method of prevention for all sclerotinias in sunflowers. Leaving 4 up to 7 years between sunflowers and other crops like canola that can carry the host or the disease successfully is probably a good practice. There are several sunflower varieties that have varying ranges of susceptibility to head rot, but none that are really showing adequate resistance just yet. So fungicides may help reduce the incidence of head rot with applications made preventatively before infections occur or observed, just like other sclerotinia products and other crops. Now, this calendar is available on our website, and it's a resource that it's available on a lot of websites, not just ours, but I refer to this calendar all the time during the growing season, probably twice a week. So you can see that it shows what pests to look for at what time of year and for how long they're a pest typically. So I generally just use it for the insects and diseases, but you can see that cutworms are going to be showing up at the beginning of May as long as it's warm enough for them to emerge or blow in, and they can be a problem up to mid to late June depending on the year. So something to keep handy. Cool wet weather from mid-August to September can delay development in sunflower, which then delays the dry down of the crop. Desiccation is a harvest aid that does the plant dry down for us, and since sunflowers are such a large plant, it's a great tool. There are many benefits of desiccating. Applying a desiccant reduces the potential losses due to bird predation, lodging and weather-related quality issues. When the time comes to desiccate, be sure to know exactly how to identify the right time for application. This is when the back of the sunflower head is banana yellow and the bracts around the head are brown to the shoulders. So you have the tip, and then at the curve of the bract, that's where the brown part will reach, and you know it's about time to desiccate if you're needing to. And grain moisture at this time should be about 35% or less, because they should be at physiological maturity. Harvest scuffing can occur at harvest, which makes a big impact on confection sunflower marketability. Scuffing is when sunflowers are harvested at a high moisture content. The combine causes mechanical damage by peeling away part of the top layer of the shell, giving the seed the appearance of sclerotinia or white seeds. So processors are known to discount for scuffing, even though it leaves no impact on the product itself. Harvest speed should be no more than 5 miles per hour to ensure heads being cut off the plants properly. When speeds are too high, the head will not be cut off the stalk and plants will fall over rather than moving through the combine or being beheaded. We have another great resource on our website called Tips and Tricks for Sunflower Harvest. And it covers most common harvest tips and mistakes that occur while combining. These include headers to use, air speed, cylinder speed, concave clearance, etc. So that can be found at that link below. And finally, it goes without saying, but always be sure to clean the combine and truck hoppers out after corn, soybeans, or pulses. If they're found in the sample, they can take confects down to a bird food quality if they're present. So you can get pretty severe dockage. Sunflower seed is safe to store at moisture content of 95% or less. At 10 to 12% moisture, seed can be stored in bins with aeration only, but anything above 12% will need to be dried. Oil type sunflowers can be dried at temperatures of 71 to 104 degrees Celsius, but confection types will scorch or may possibly scorch or wrinkle at these temperatures. Sunflower seed should be cooled before storage, because even sunflowers at 8.5% moisture can be spoiled if stored warm. Now finally, marketing. Here in Manitoba, we grow about 75% of sunflower acres nationally, and last year we had about 85,000 acres. We're fortunate to have local markets for several end-use products, which is a very special position to be in Manitoba. Of course, there's always room for market development and more contracts for producers. Oilseed sunflowers do compete in a market with several other commodities, but there has been increased demand for sunflower oil over the past few years, and consumers have found a preference for it over other vegetable oils. Confection sunflowers are competitive in the snack food market against popcorn, peanuts, and other more recent niche products like chickpea and lentil snacks. 2020 was a rough year for confection markets, which is a direct result of COVID and fewer outdoor professional and amateur sports being played. We weren't eating the spits. Now, I just got numbers this morning that current contract prices are rough, but oils are looking like they're about 26 cents, and confects, you might find them between 30 and 35 cents, which is, these are pretty great prices. So for those looking to get into sunflowers, I think that now might be the time. And finally, the Manitoba Crop Alliance does have a list of local buyers for our commodities on our website. That's a link in the bottom right corner. I've pulled the sunflower buyers if anyone is interested, an easy screenshot here. But yeah, it's also readily available on our site. So I hope I've covered our topic well today. If not, I can be contacted at any of this information here. And I thank you for your time today.
So thank you so much for your presentation, number one. And let's talk about a little bit about markets available for prairie producers and what those markets have been like.
Yeah, so what I had really gone over in those last couple of slides was that our acreage has gone up. In Manitoba, we do grow about 75% of the Canadian acres. So Manitoba's got a market, and of course we've got a newly blooming local market. So oilseed sunflowers compete in a market with several other commodities, but there's been increased demand for sunflower oil over the last few years, mostly because consumers are finding new preferences. So sunflower oil consumption is increasing as a result over other vegetable oils. Confects are competitive in snack food markets against popcorn, peanuts, new things like chickpeas and lentil snacks, which are new in the market and delicious, I won't deny. So yeah, but in 2020, we did find that we had a little bit of a struggle with the confection market just because of, the outdoor amateur and professional sports really took a hit, and so did edible sunflowers that we always snack on. So that's basically what I went over. And then, of course, we have a list of buyers on our website that producers can look into if they're looking for buyers. And then I had mentioned the current pricing, which was rough, and it was from earlier this week, but oilseeds were about 26 cents a pound, and confections, you can probably find them from about 30 to 35 cents a pound, which is a pretty outstanding number.
Excellent. I think that covered everything as well from your presentation. Now we do have a couple of questions from our audience. I know that you answered them in the chat, but why don't we go through them again? So we have one that says, we'll be banding our fertilizer in nitrogen and phosphorus in a side band 5 inches from the seed row. Is that too far from the seed row? We have the ability to also place some fertilizer with the seed row if needed. What would be the maximum rates of NMP if placing with the seed? Would you like to comment on all of that?
Yeah, so I recommend not putting nitrogen down with a seed because it is so volatile, especially with sunflowers are sensitive to it. Most crops are. Nitrogen and potash would both be sensitive to the crop, or the crop would be sensitive to them. Phosphorus will be more tolerated, but I don't recall what the number is right now, which is easy to look up, I think. So if you have to put something down with the seed, I would say that it's probably just going to be a little bit of phosphorus. And he also is banding at 5 inches, which is pretty far from the seed. So I would be a little bit concerned about what's available as the seed germinates and gets to, the first VE, V2 kind of stages. But once the roots are growing, I think that 5 inches is going to be good. Of course, this year is a little dry, so if you don't get more moisture, it might be a little bit more sensitive to the roots. So as with anything, I hope we just get more moisture to make it less sensitive. So 2 to 3 inches is ideal for a band just to get the crop off early, or crop started early, I guess.
Thank you. Here's another one. Grower is asking if you have worked with any of the pelletized seeds that are available in the last couple of years, and he says that it's supposed to even up the seed size and help with skips and misses. Do you have any experience with these yet?
I don't have any experience with them. I've never seen them in action, but yeah, I would be interested in seeing it. I don't have any data on that.
Right. Yeah. It's still quite new. So you mentioned that it's probably a good year to get into sunflowers. I've heard that there's quite a bit more challenges to growing confection than there are to oilseeds. Would you recommend that farmers who are thinking about adding sunflowers to the rotation, that they maybe start with the oilseed market?
That's a good question. I've never been asked that before, but it probably is a little bit easier to ease into the crop with that, because there are less things to worry about, specifically insects and disease. You have to be right on top of them with sunflowers and have good scouting experience and time to be scouting. So oilseeds are a lot more flexible in that way. You can also, you can plant at higher rates. They're just, a little bit more easygoing. So yeah, I would say for a new producer, that might be the easiest way to start. Of course, confects do come at a premium price, so that's another thing to look at. Yeah,
exactly.
And definitely contracts. You need a contract usually before you jump into sunflowers to know what your options are.
Exactly. Now, I'm not sure how far everybody got in the video, but you talked about desiccation. And I was just wondering, desiccation versus natural dry down in our area. Do you have any advice or preference or what?
I don't really have a preference. It just seems to depend on the year, in my opinion. There are a lot of guys that do it no matter what, unless they're drying down prematurely. The sunflowers are drying down prematurely and evenly. It's just unusual that the crop is able to dry down evenly, especially in the last few years. If they're maybe finishing up early in a dry year, like they maybe want to be doing this year, that might make it a little bit easier, but generally it just makes them more easily harvested without losses and less of a headache come harvest with all the plant that's going through the combine.
Right. Yep. Those are some good advantages. And so if we're heading into maybe some drier cycles, are sunflowers a good bet on your land?
They are. So sunflowers, they're a heavy water user, but they're not as heavy as other crops. Corn uses a lot more water than sunflowers do. Soybeans can even use a little bit more water, and sunflowers have the ability to seek out the water a little bit better than other crops. So as long as we can get them started in a good way, they have enough moisture to germinate and sort of get heading out. During vegetative stages, they don't need as much water, but come pollination, blooming time, that's when they really need the water. So July and August are going to be the heavy water using periods. So I don't know, I struggle with this one, but sunflowers will definitely find the water if there is some in the soil. So that's kind of the game that I feel like I'm playing my brain a little bit this spring, whether there's water to find.
Exactly. That's a great answer. We have another question for you. This farmer is from southwestern Ontario. He said, I want to use sunflowers as a cover crop, planting after wheat. How deep would roots go and other value?
Sunflower roots, I don't know what the other value means.
Yeah, I think maybe asking about the benefits of having deep roots.
Yep.
And how deep do they go?
Yeah. So they are going to be about the most deep-rooted crop that we plant. They have a bit better of a taproot system, so they're going to reach down 6 feet or so, but they also have a good secondary fibrous root system, I guess. So they scavenge a lot. They'll be much deeper rooted than a wheat plant will. They might dry up the soil though for that wheat, but they are valuable for water use. Well, clarify how you help.
Well, and I've also heard that if there's any nutrients or minerals down deep, they can also really get at all of that and really take advantage of that.
Yeah, exactly. I think that the biggest thing with sunflowers having that ability to scavenge so much for water and nutrients is that next year, if we don't get the water, then those soils will be a little bit more depleted than other soils.
Right. Well, I believe that's all the questions that we have for you today. Thank you so much, Morgan, for being with us here today. And I do apologize again for the technical difficulties.
It's not your fault. I appreciate it.
Technology, right?
Yeah.
Thank you. And we hope to see you around the fields in the next year.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Carrie.
Take care. So that was Morgan Cott. And for the rest of the session, we'll be looking at national weather updates from Markets Farm expert Bruce Burnett. There will be no live Q&A for this segment of the webinar. However, Bruce would love to hear from you. Please check out the offer tab on the right side of your screen for details on how to reach him with a Markets Farm free trial. Now, Bruce Burnett is the Markets Farm Director of Weather and Markets Information. Bruce has been involved in monitoring markets and weather for more than 30 years. His specialty is the analysis of weather conditions and their impact on global agricultural markets. Today, Bruce will provide us with the upcoming weather outlook.
Hi, I'm Bruce Burnett, Director of Weather and Market Analysis at Glacier Farm Media, and I'm here today to talk to you about the weather and market outlook for sunflowers in 2021. I guess we need to go back and take a look at the precipitation across Western Canada last growing season, and again, the only area that received above normal precipitation was out in Western Saskatchewan and Alberta. And if you look in southern Manitoba, we really didn't pick up that much in terms of moisture over the growing season. It was below normal across most of the southern areas of the province. There was an area in Western Manitoba that picked up above average precipitation, but those were from those very heavy rains that we had in June in essentially the Brandon area and north. So really didn't hit our main sunflower growing areas. So the sunflower growing regions in Manitoba were quite dry through the last growing season. You'll see here the soil moisture map as of November the 1st. This is from Les Henry. Again, we have most of the prairies in dry to very dry conditions. Manitoba falls into that dry category, which if you followed Les's maps over the years, it's pretty exceptional for us to be dry on the subsoil side in Manitoba. We just get a little bit more annual precipitation, and on his scale, certainly, we usually are in that moist to wet. And in some years, in the past 10, we've had to actually be in a extremely wet category that he created. So right now we're in a dry cycle and didn't have a lot of moisture going into winter. The main driver for our winter weather is La Nina. And so here's the updated La Nina forecast. It was made early this month, but you can see those gray bars, which is the neutral phase of the ENSO event in the Pacific. Certainly, it looks like for April, May, June, July, August, we're going to be in this neutral phase rather than the La Nina that we were through this winter. Now, the La Nina during the winter should have given us colder temperatures and above normal precipitation, but it really just didn't work out that way on the prairies this year. It's going to be one of those anomalous years where we didn't see that relationship happen. We did get some cold temperatures in February. Here's our deviation from average in February. And again, most of the prairies, 5 degrees below normal. That was our only cold spell this winter. Otherwise, it was a very, very warm winter. If you take a look at the sort of the past month or the month to the first week in April here, we've actually been quite a bit above normal. Again, lost most of our snow cover, which is a bit of a concern here, especially in Manitoba, because we didn't have much to begin with, and we did start to lose soil moisture to the atmosphere in those warm days we've had over the past month. Of course, the main story has been this recent precipitation. I'm going to go through it a little bit. The picture is far from complete yet. We're recording this on April the 14th, and the snows are just starting to disappear from Manitoba, so we'll see how it works out. But it is not going to be necessarily that event that changes the direction of the growing season here, but certainly it's better than getting nothing right now. And you'll have to remember that most of the areas west of Regina didn't pick up a lot of moisture. If we go into the winter precipitation here, this is the percentiles of precipitation. And there's been two big dry areas on the prairies. One is in the eastern prairies, focused on Manitoba, and that deep, dark red, almost brown, black color is the precipitation percentile that is associated with maybe the driest or the second or third driest years on record. So in other words, this winter was a record dry winter across most of southern Manitoba. So that's why we're so concerned. There's also a pocket in Alberta, but those areas really didn't pick up an awful lot of moisture or didn't need an awful lot of moisture this winter because they have decent subsoil moisture. If you would remember back to Les's map this fall. So how is La Nina, or the lack of La Nina into a neutral phase, going to impact our weather this year? Here's the temperature map for April, May, June. We have above normal temperatures skirting the southern prairies and covering most of Manitoba. Again, it's hard to believe that when we're sitting just about at the freezing mark here with snow on the ground in parts of the province. But that's the forecast right now, and certainly it's, I think, probably indicative of what kind of weather pattern we're going to have. There's also a severe cold anomaly out in the western areas of the prairies, northwestern areas of the prairies, and then through the west coast. This is a little bit different than sort of how we're setting up here in late April. In late April, we're going to see some ridging activity over the west coast, and that's actually going to help us out a little bit in terms of the temperatures. But unfortunately, it's going to mean we're going to remain dry after essentially the middle of the month here in April. Here's the longer-term precipitation, April, May, June. Below normal precipitation expected for the southern areas of Alberta, across into southern Manitoba, Saskatchewan. Doesn't quite get into the Manitoba growing areas, but certainly I would say in the western areas of the province, I would tend to believe that we're going to be on the lower side of the precipitation levels, at least until late spring. My longer term forecast in this is basically that we're going to see an improvement in the precipitation chances, at least as we get into the latter part of May into June, as the weather pattern changes a little bit more in our favor. But certainly, again, long-term forecasts are not a precise science here, so we'll just leave it at that. Just to take a look at that storm system that moved through the prairies, there were two areas that really picked up good amounts of moisture. One was in eastern Saskatchewan, again, sort of the Weyburn area up into Melfort, that region. Some of that did spill over into the Parkland areas, and again, this map was made on April the 13th. Sorry, there's a typo in there, but really, we're looking at some pretty drier conditions as you move out of that band into sort of parts of western Manitoba and into the Red River Valley. The big precipitation in the east is more or less east of the Red River, again with some variable amounts. But if we were going to take the main sunflower growing areas, let's say from the Southern Valley, so again from, let's say, Dominion City across to Wascata, south of the number 1 highway, that area has not picked up an awful lot of moisture here, and it is a concern. Soils are dry. We need to see some precipitation here. Of course, when it comes to planting row crops and crops like sunflowers, the moisture situation probably isn't going to be ideal here after we get the snow melted. That moisture, if we do remain dry through the end of the month, is going to disappear pretty quickly. One way of looking at this is to just take a look at the 30-day change from normal. In other words, the anomaly. And you can see we did add a little bit of moisture to the system now with this precipitation amount over the past 30 days. But again, I've circled western Manitoba, western and most of central Manitoba, we really didn't pick up an awful lot when you compare that to normal. In fact, we're still running below normal on a 30-day basis here. So again, it's good to get those snows, but really we don't look on this. We're going to need some additional rainfall here, probably by the first week in May. So let's take a look at the sunflower situation globally. Again, we'll start with the U.S. because they're so important for our market. U.S. sunflowers, the area is expected to be down sharply this year, down to 1.2 million acres, which is 9% lower than last year when they planted a total of 1.7 of all sunflowers, again, both confectionery and oilseed types. North Dakota area was projected by the USDA, at least anyway, to be down 43% this year. So in their farmer survey, farmers indicated that close, not quite half, but close to half of the area was going to go down this year. Oil sunflowers were down by 41%, but confectionery types were down 59%. And again, this has pushed North Dakota now to being the second largest sunflower area in the U.S. That's going to dip down below the area devoted to sunflowers in South Dakota here. So a fairly large change in South Dakota, in that sunflower area in North Dakota. Obviously, what has happened here is sunflowers have not competed well, especially on the oil side, with some other oilseed crops like canola, whose area has gone up significantly year on year. Soybeans, again, seeing a large year on year increase, and even flax, which is up sharply from last year in North Dakota. So we're seeing that transition here. That's going to make things interesting in the North American market because, again, supplies are going to be relatively tight here, even though we produced more last year. This is certainly going to tighten the situation down if we see these areas drop as much as this. I think it's just a small microcosm of the overall situation for global sunflowers. The sunflower situation globally, and again, we're mostly talking about oil sunflowers here, is going to be extremely tight. And again, it's just, we're going to see some movement of sunflower area into some other competing oil seeds, which are certainly at the moment, again, look maybe a little bit more profitable. Just to take a look at that sunflower area in the graph, you can see now we're below the area that we planted in the U.S. over the past 10 years. Last year was a good year for sunflowers. We saw a pickup. Again, when we're planting last year's crop, we weren't anticipating the big prices that we saw for certain oil seeds. So that did help out on the sunflower side. So this drop certainly pushes us back down again into the lower realms of what the U.S. normally plants, at least anyway, for sunflowers. If we want to take a look at the global vegetable oil situation, and this is really what's driving the oil side of the sunflower markets here, it's some very, very tight oilseed stocks. USDA increased their vegetable oil ending stocks estimate in the April report here, but if you take a look at the graph on a stocks-to-use basis, in other words, how many stocks they're projecting to have at the end of the year for the major oil seeds in the globe versus the use, or how much we use in a year, we're down to about 7.7%. This is the lowest levels that we've seen in the last 10 to 15, or in the last 15 years. Actually, a few months ago, the USDA has added to the ending stocks estimates. Otherwise, we were looking at the tightest levels since the late 1970s on a stocks-to-use basis. So global veg oils are very, very tight. That's causing the increase in vegetable oil prices, palm oil, soybean oil, and what that is driving is higher prices for the seeds. Soybeans, maybe not so much because it's a low oil content oilseed, but certainly for canola, that drives the bus for canola when we see high soybean oil prices. If you look at the global sunflower oilseed situation, again, this is in days of use, so it's not that percentage stocks to use, it's that percentage translated into the number of days of use. You'll see that globally we're expecting at the end of this year, International Oil Year, which ends in October, I believe, for USDA, we are looking at some very, very tight ending stocks for sunflowers this year. And although there aren't weather problems across the globe, we certainly have a few issues that have added to this situation. Again, sunflowers in Argentina. Argentina is a large producer and exporter of sunflower oil. They grow most of it in southern Buenos Aires, in what is essentially the Bahia Blanca area, over into parts of La Pampa. This area is a little bit outside of the soybean area, so but it has been dry. This is the March percent of normal, so they had some dry finishing conditions for their sunflowers. Yields have dropped a bit in Argentina this year. Harvest is actually getting close to complete. It's over 80% or close to 80% done. So within the next couple of weeks, we're going to see that harvest complete. Again, it's a bit opposite in South America. The harvest of crops like sunflowers occurs essentially south to north, just because of the crop stages and the fact that the southern areas are the coldest growing areas. If you take a look at the big producers, again, Russia, they've had a lot of moisture this spring, so you're looking at those eastern Russian growing areas, which are the most significant for Russia in terms of sunflowers. Those areas have pretty good starting soil moisture here. It has been cool, so it's planting is getting off to a slower start, let's say, for some of those row crops, but it's not that cool that we should be that concerned about it. Again, there will be lots of competition for competing oilseeds here, so I would anticipate that we're going to see the area maybe be reduced slightly as they move to other things, but it'll still be a significant crop. Again, Russia and Ukraine produce about 12 to 13 million tons, mostly of vegetable oil or of oil-based sunflowers. Ukraine, again, they're like the Russian situation. You can see the areas there that produce the largest amounts of sunflowers, sort of in the central areas of the country. Certainly, they've gotten off to a good start in terms of moisture. As I said, for Russia, these areas are adjacent to each other. So there has been a bit of a cool start here, but I don't think it's going to really delay plantings all that much. But again, I don't think there's going to be a huge increase in sunflower area here. One of the there's been two developments in this region that I think you need to pay close attention to, especially on the sunflower oil side. The first thing is that the government in Russia has instituted a seed export tax on sunflowers and will likely install a tax on on sunflower oil exports as well in June. Ukraine right now is considering installing a tax on seed themselves. So this is certainly going to impact the European market. It's something to keep a close eye on. The other thing is that there's lots of military activity on the border of the Russian-Ukrainian border right now. And there is speculation that Russia is going to maybe try another incursion into Ukrainian territory here. Again, I'm not a politician, so I don't understand necessarily the dynamics that are at work here or what's in Putin's mind right now, but certainly if something like that happens, that can impact all markets, but it is especially important for the sunflower market. Finally, let's move to the U.S. Just quickly go over the moisture there that they've had. This is a similar metric to what we saw for the Canadian winter precipitation. This is the 6-month percentile rank of precipitation. You can see that most of North Dakota, parts of northwestern Minnesota, as well as a bit of southern North Dakota is extremely dry. What driest on record? These records go back to 1895. So certainly an extended dryness here in the northern plains. That's going to be the thing we're going to be looking at for most of this year. If you take a look at that moisture that we received, the pattern is much the same as it was on the north side of the border. The precipitation essentially in North Dakota fell from, I would say, the Manitoba-Saskatchewan border area, so let's say Portal, North Dakota, down into Minot, and then into the area east of Bismarck, where they picked up essentially an inch of measurable moisture. But if you look over most of the state, western parts of North Dakota, certainly outside of the Red River Valley in North Dakota, you certainly didn't receive an awful lot of precipitation there, 5 millimeters or less, which is really nothing in terms of helping the situation out. So again, we need some more rain. We're going to need some timely rain as we go through this growing season. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your attention, and certainly it was good to provide a brief update here on the weather and market outlooks here for sunflowers.
Many thanks to Bruce for those weather and market insights. And thank you, audience, for joining us for our session on sunflowers in our Hot Topics in Commodity series this year. Finally, a big thank you to our guest speakers, Morgan Cott from the Manitoba Crop Alliance and Market Farms' Bruce Burnett for providing market updates. Thank you for joining us today, and have a wonderful afternoon.